Yeah, it's new Chumash, new cycle. You ready?
I sure am.
New week, new Chumash, and Mazal Tov to us for starting a new cycle. As we mentioned last week, this is our third cycle now for doing these Parsha talks. We started these back in the beginning of Corona 2 years ago, and Baruch Hashem, we've managed to do this every single week. And Am Hashem, we'll try to continue doing these every single week from now on. We'd like also to take a moment to thank all the viewers and everyone that's subscribed to the channel and everyone that's been commenting every single week and sending us questions and follow-ups. Everyone, thank you very much for watching these. This has been one great fulfilling ride, and Am Hashem will continue this. Now, this week, Yitzi, I want to talk about the Chomsh itself that we're starting now, Sefer Bamidbar, which is called by the Gemara, and we also refer to it as Sefer HaPakודים, in English, the Book of Numbers, because we find in this week's Parasha, HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Moshe Rabbeinu to count Am Yisrael several times, also Am Yisrael, also the Levim. We find it also later on in the Chumash, HaKadosh Baruch Hu telling Moshe to count Am Yisrael. And one of the biggest questions about this concept of lifkod, to count, is does lifkod really mean to count? Because we find this shoresh of PAKAD, Pei, Kuf, Dalet, in many different meanings in the Torah and in the Tanach itself. And if we take a look at this week's Parasha, even in the Parasha itself, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's about counting, that it means to count. So what does the concept of Pekudei actually mean? What is the concept of Lifkod, Pakad, Chumash HaPkudim about? How does the Shoresh Pei Kuf Dalet come into play in this week's Parasha, in this great idea of numbers and counting?
And it's very interesting. And as you said, even within our Parsha, it starts with Tifkedu, you should count Am Yisrael. And then later on, it tells Moshe, Tifkod, who should he count? Aaron and Banav, Aaron and his children. There's only three, Aaron and two children who are still alive. Obviously, isn't telling him to count them. He knows how many there are. And even the pasuk just before gave us the names of Aaron and his children. So really, what does that mean? And as we've said in the past, when we want to truly understand the essence of the word, we go back to where it shows up first in Torah and go through the different places it's mentioned. But when we start doing that with the word PAKAD, we just get even more confused because it starts with Sarah, Hashem PAKAD et Sarah, when she became pregnant. What does that mean? How does that have to do with counting? And then it goes on with Sarah Tabachim, who gives Yosef a job, a tafkid, we say in Hebrew today, right? He puts him responsible for something. That's vayafked. We also see that in our Parsha when the Levim get the responsibility. But we see this also further on. The concept of pikadon. Pikadon is when you put something by someone else, like a deposit, right? When someone owes someone else money and they leave someone, or if they just put something by someone else, that's a pikadon. We see the concept of Yosef telling his brothers, Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem, which means redemption. Hashem's going to save you. And then we see in our Parsha, the Pekudim. Even in Nach, we see Vayipaked makom David. When David didn't come to the meal by Shaul, his place was missing. So is Pikadon missing? Is Pikadon a deposit? Is Pikadon remembering Sarah being pregnant? What does it actually mean? And how can all of these words actually connect to one concept? But I think if we look carefully, we will find the common line between them all. All of them have to do with something that may be lost in the many and is now being noticed, is now being pulled out and being given a certain purpose. This is true with everything. Even if we go back to Sarah. Sarah thought the purpose of bringing new life, of continuing Avram, of continuing Am Yisrael in the world is not her. She already took Hagar and she was the one who gave her to Avram. And Hashem says, you're not forgotten. You do have this purpose. And when Hashem actually takes her and makes her pregnant, that's Hashem PAKAD et Sarah. But this goes on. We see when Yosef gets a tafkid, right? He could have been just another slave, but no, he's given a special responsibility. And this is also true with a pikadon. If someone gives me an object, it could be lost between all of my objects. But no, this is different than every other object I have in my house because all the other objects belong to me. But this object, this one has a purpose, and this won't be forgotten. At some point, the owner will come pick it up. And maybe that's what Yosef is telling Am Yisrael. You're going to be lost here in Egypt for many, many years. You may feel forgotten, but you're not. You're just here as a pikadon. Hashem hasn't forgotten you. You have a purpose. And at some point, Hashem will come back and Pakod yifkod Elohim etchem and take you out of Mitzrayim so you can fulfill your purpose. And this is also what we see with David HaMelech, because there's many people who come to a meal. You don't always notice who's there, who's not there. But when suddenly Shaul notices David is missing, nifkad mekom David, it's again that. noticing one from the many. It's noticing that someone is different, has a certain responsibility, has a certain purpose, and he's not just one of many. And that's what we see in our Parsha too in most of the places. We see the Levim are mufkadim al, they get the responsibility over the Mishkan. Aaron here is getting a responsibility. Tifkodotam is not count them, obviously. We know that they're three, but it's giving them a certain responsibility over something. But then we go back and ask, if that's the case, then why is counting lifkod? Counting is counting. Why? That's not giving a responsibility. What responsibility are Am Yisrael getting? But obviously, when we see this word and we see what it means all over, maybe we don't understand what counting is. Maybe counting isn't about how many there are. Hashem knows how many there are. Counting is about, as the pasuk starts, Se'u et rosh. Se'u means to raise up et rosh. Rosh is individual, not rashay. Don't raise up the heads of Israel. One, because counting is all about going one by one. It's about saying that each individual has a purpose. Within this thing that's called Am Yisrael, within this group that's called Am Yisrael that has its general purpose, everyone plays a role. Everyone plays a certain note. If you pull one note out, the whole composition falls apart. It doesn't work. Every single individual has a purpose. That's the essence of lifkod. It's not counting. Just like it's not counting with Aaron, it's not counting with Sarah, it's not counting with PAKAD yifkod Elohim etchem. Also here with Am Yisrael, it's just like redeeming you in PAKAD yifkod. It's redeeming you from being forgotten and lost in just so many people and what is my role, and you're being PAKAD yifkod. Hashem's calling you individually and saying you have a role, you have a purpose. There's something that only you and only you can do. That's what this concept of lifkod really is about.
Very good. It's very good what you're saying, and I agree with that idea that this is not only about counting, but actually counting with a purpose and showing the purpose, meaning counting Am Yisrael is not about only giving a number, a total number for Am Yisrael, but actually calling out each individual in Am Yisrael, just like each Levi, each Kohen has a clear purpose. So maybe for Am Yisrael it's not as clear, but they too have a purpose, each individual for themselves. Each individual has a tafkid, like we're saying. And interestingly enough, we don't always notice this because of Chomash Vaikra, which is right there between Shemot and Sefer Bamidbar. But when you look in Rashi, the first Rashi on the Parsha, you see that Rashi actually connects this week's Parasha with the end of Sefer Shemot, saying that the Mishkan was established on the beginning of Nisan in the second year, and this Parsha is taking place on Chodesh Iyar, the beginning of Iyar, just a month later of that same year. And when you think about it like this, and you look at the parashot, how does Sefer Shemot end? Sefer Shemot ends with Ele Pekudei HaMishkan, meaning each thing in the Mishkan, each object in the Mishkan may look like a simple object, but it's an object with a purpose. It's a holy object. It's Hegdish. It's Kadosh. If you do anything with it you're not supposed to do, you're a Mo'el, you're doing Me'ilah, you're actually stealing from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what these objects in the Mishkan are about, the Pekudei HaMishkan. So the same thing here, Pekudei Bnei Yisrael, each individual has a purpose for himself, but also for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like we've mentioned many times in our videos, each person has a purpose in this world that HaKadosh Baruch Hu designated for that person in this world. And also interesting that the Netziv in the beginning of this Chumash, and his Akdama to Chumash Bamidbar, talks about the two countings that we have in Sefer Bamidbar, over here in the beginning in Parashat Bamidbar, and also later on in Parashat Pinchas, where we find Am Yisrael being counted by Moshe for different reasons. And the Netziv explains that these two countings represent a different stage in Am Yisrael's life. Obviously, the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, right after Yetziat Mitzrayim, when they're still thinking that they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, before the terrible Chet of Chet HaMeraglim that brought on them this big punishment of 40 years in the Midbar, and then later on when they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, preparing to go into Eretz Yisrael, and explains in Netziv that these two countings are different stages, because the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar, Am Yisrael are still in this world of miracles, and this Olam Me'al HaTeva, in this world that's above the nature, where everything is happening to them miraculously. Moshe Rabbeinu does these miracles to fight for them and win for them the battles, where at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, Am Yisrael are about to go into Eretz Yisrael, and we discussed this many times in the past, where when they go into Eretz Yisrael, that's the stage when they move from seeing the miracles in a very clear, miraculous way, to having miracles within the Teva, within the nature, like the Ramban and many others say, that you don't notice these miracles anymore, and this is where Am Yisrael will be at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, and these two countings represent these two different stages of Am Yisrael, these two different purposes purposes Am Yisrael had in their lives, and the beginning living in this olam al tivi, in this unnatural world, and then later on going into the world, going into the olam hazeh, going into the world where the miracles happen b'tzura tivit. Those are two different purposes, two different beings of Am Yisrael represented by these two different countings. And connecting to what we were saying, this counting is what gives them this new purpose, what gives them this new being. This is what connects them to this new purpose they have for the world, which is very different at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar and at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. And being here in Eretz Yisrael, Erev Yom Yerushalayim, Erev Shichur Yerushalayim, the day we celebrate reuniting Yerushalayim again and taking control of Har HaBayit. You know, there's always this question of what's so important about Har HaBayit, about that place. Why can't we go a little bit left, a little bit right? Why can't we have the Kotel instead of Har HaBayit? But this is exactly it. Ele Pekudei HaMishkan that we saw in Sefer Shemot. The Pekudim here, every single thing has a purpose in this world. Every single being, every single object, but even more so, also places. Eretz Yisrael, Har HaBayit, they have a purpose. We might not understand them, we might not see them, but they have a godly purpose in this world that we have to connect to, that nourish us, that give us our power, that give us our strength, that give us our own purpose, who we are supposed to be. This is all part of it. This is all part of our belief. This is all part of our greater purpose. And in Mitzvah Hashem, we should be zocha very soon to see this purpose being fulfilled in reality with Binyan Beit HaMikdash b'mera b'yameinu.
Amen, amen. You know, this concept of everyone being special, this sort of individualism, can also lead to negative things. As we discussed last year, that the problem with counting is actually the fact that everyone becomes alone on their own. Everyone is their own thing, and you've separated the group. But I think that what the Torah is teaching us here is something really important. When you take each individual who thinks he has all the value in the world on his own, that may be a negative. It's all about me, me, me. I don't care. I'm going to be different. I'm going to be my own thing. That's a negative. And also the other side of saying, let's group everyone together. We don't care about it, the individuals. All we care about is the community, is the public. We see, by the way, these both on the Western ideology versus the Eastern ideology. Each one goes to one extreme. One is it's all about me as an individual, and the other one is, it's all about the group. We don't care about the individual. He can be crushed under this sort of group. And we're here in the middle in Eretz Yisrael, and what we're saying is very different. Yes, each individual has value, but you know why each individual has a value? Because he's part of a whole. It's, as I mentioned earlier, it's like a note in a song. If I take out one note, the song falls apart. This one note on its own is not very important, is almost worthless. It's just one note. But this one note as part of a whole, the responsibility of the whole song lays on this one note, and on that one note, and on that one note. The concept of lifkod betoch b'nei Yisrael is about counting each one, saying that without you, all of Am Yisrael can't reach its purpose. And without you, all of Am Yisrael can't reach its purpose. This doesn't mean you need to be you on your own and forget Am Yisrael. The opposite. You get greater importance, greater value, greater responsibility when you realize that all of Am Yisrael's responsibility is laying on your shoulders. Therefore, if you want to break off and say, oh, I'm so important, I'm not part of the whole, then everything falls apart, as we discussed. But if you see your value, which is much greater than your individual value, as part of that whole, and you realize that you can't succeed without one of this entire group, that is what lifkod is about. That's why we go and we count one after the other, and then we regroup with our flags in the Shvatim, and as Am Yisrael, and the Levim, and the Kohanim. There's different group responsibilities, but each one of these responsibilities at the end of the day goes back down to each individual, who without him, we can't achieve our full goal.
Beautiful, beautiful, very true, and very true words to end with. We'll just remind our viewers that we've been doing this for 2 years, so there are 2 videos to watch and continue watching about this parasha. We'll link those videos at the end of this one. We'll just again say thank you to everyone who's reached out regarding the book that we'll be working on to put all these talks into a sefer. So if you're also still interested in making a dedication in memory of one of your relatives in the sefer, feel free to reach out to us. And as usual, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to comment below, like the video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. And shkoyach Yitzi.
Shkoyach Tuvia, Shabbat Shalom.
Shkoyach to you, Shabbat Shalom, and Emir Tashem next week, Erev Chag HaShavuos, we'll talk about the Chag and the Shabbat.